Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. For those who's joining from India, I'm your host, Logesh Manivanan, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our Learning Bytes session, which is a virtual lunch and learn series. But today we're testing a different time, so we're very happy to have all of you joining us today. I would like to introduce you to our guest speakers. First, we have Jane Ng, who's our independent product consultant, and also she's recently joined as our product management instructor at Curious Core. And then we also have Dalen So, who's our founder and educator at Curious Core. So the topic for today that we're going to discuss is the intersection between product design and management. So now I'd like to pass the floor to Dalen.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Very glad to have all of you here joining us today. We created Learning Bytes to actually have shorter sessions where we can talk about product and the emerging field of product, whether it's product management or product design, and related more to the leadership aspects that concerns companies, that concerns teams. So very glad to have a friend here today, Jane, who is now working with us and helping us with our product management program. And Jane, I first met Jane in an interview in Zalora many years ago. I did not get selected for the interview, but I made a friend instead. So it's good to have you here, Jane. And I was just wondering if you'd like to talk us through a little bit more about the work you do today as an independent product consultant.
Yeah, so people come to me usually with some sort of a product related problem like, I want to scale, or I need to redesign my interface, really all kinds of product related problems that people come to me. Something that I'm working on right now is I'm working with a robotics company to look at how to redesign the interface of their products, because they never had a product manager or UX designer look at it. So I'm actually helping them to rethink it almost from scratch. Yeah. Some of the other work I did recently is I've also worked on a UX research project with a local wellness company where they were thinking about how they could scale, but they weren't sure how, because they weren't really sure how to frame what people were buying. So I did a research project with someone to do some interviews and figure out, why are people joining this program? What did they get out of it? And, made some recommendations.
Well, yeah. Thank you for sharing those recent projects. They certainly sound very exciting. And I think on the projects that you mentioned, it sounds like some of those projects are actually not really related to technology or digital products. So could you expand a little bit more and tell us more, like, how do you apply user experience design process or product management skills into some of these non-tech projects?
Yeah, so I really do think that the skill set and the thinking that you get from UX or product, which is basically the build, test, learn loop, is something which is applicable to almost any industry. So with this wellness company, they have a program that people sign up for, and it's almost entirely it's basically kind of like a service with some physical elements to the service. And I find that bringing in a product or like UX mindset really helped, because you understand how to frame the problem, and then therefore how to understand more about the problem, and then from there how to figure out an ideal solution. This mindset is something which I've also seen in other products. I'm just thinking which one. Yeah, I guess I'll just talk about the wellness one. I can't think of anything else right now.
Yeah, that's fair. And let's say I'm a business owner and I want to hire people with such a mindset, right? You talk about UX mindset or product mindset. How do I tell if someone has a UX mindset or a product mindset?
I think there's an element of curiosity and being open to experimentation, because the build, test, learn loop does involve a lot of experimentation. You have to be comfortable with that. I think if you go to someone and they promise you that they're going to deliver you a solution, but they haven't really looked into the problem, I think that's a red flag. Really, some of the best UX and product professionals that I've ever met or worked with are the ones who are very curious about the problem and what it really is. They really question what do you think you're solving for before they come into a solution.
Well, yeah, I think that's a very valid point, because the majority of people I meet in interviews, as I interview people, tend to be more solution oriented. They'll tell me about the solution, but sometimes they don't even describe how they derive at the solution. They just say, hey, this is the solution. I've done this before, and I'll just use this solution. Or someone did this solution, or a competitor did this solution. I'll just use that solution. And in the context, like, I'm trying to find evidence, or I'm trying to find examples where this mindset or this way of working, can it actually drive business growth and innovation? Yeah, I'm just wondering, from your experience, have you seen that in your working life?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you take a sort of more open and experimental mindset to actually investigate what you think your problem is, you might find that, before you were solving for the wrong thing, or you don't understand your customers or the problem well enough, and therefore you don't understand the drivers well enough. So I have seen this where, once you understand a problem and you understand what is the opportunity and you've really framed it, you're in a much better position to understand what are the drivers and therefore to grow your business, for sure.
I'm wondering if you have a tangible example from where you used to work, where you actually seen the application of UX or product management skills, and how did that lead to like increased sales or cost savings, or just like innovating an entirely new business? Like, have you actually seen that or experienced that before?
Yeah, I mean, I think Zalora is a very good example, right? When I was at Zalora, everything was really angled towards, okay, how are we going to move the needle on something? So, for example, I would work with, the marketing team, because the marketing team wanted to increase, click-through rates and conversions. So, I gave them some qualitative research that I did. I gave them insights from which we could build a hypothesis and then test it. And if when those hypotheses were correct, then they now knew, oh, we need to do this thing more often.
That's a really valid point. And I suppose from what you're describing, it actually led to better conversions, and better conversions led to more sales. That's great. And that's a great way to justify the value of the team as well, and the person who is bringing these skill sets to the company. I think so far you've worked for different tech companies and different tech startups. You work in both the UX function and in the product function. And I was just wondering, what are some of the common sort of like misconceptions about what you do, right, as a UXer or as a product manager?
Yeah, I talk with my PM and UX friends about this a lot. I think as a UX professional, the most common problem I see is companies not understanding what UX is and thinking that UI is UX, and they're really two completely different domains. UI is part of UX. It's an important part, because if something doesn't look good, you might be less likely to use it, or it just might look less attractive. But yeah, I think confusing UX and UI is one issue. As a PM, I think a very common problem is businesses not understanding what a PM should do and bogging down the product manager with things like, like cleaning up after the CEO and like just writing tickets and trying to contain the mess of a business. Yeah, those are two things I've seen.
Wow, it sounds like there's a lot of pain in that, and I'm not sure. Should I ask you, like, have you actually gone through those misconceptions, and how did you help people to gently understand what you actually do?
I think it's really hard, right? And I mean, I've definitely personally experienced that where I was hired for a UX role, but I was expected to do UI, even though I made very clear that I didn't do UI work. And this led to a lot of pain. But, you know, I still think that demonstrating value, no matter what your job title really doesn't matter. Like, you call yourself whatever you want. I call myself a product consultant because honestly, my role is so broad. But yeah, I think it's possible to educate people, you know, patiently, and to demonstrate the value that you bring, regardless of your job title. But it also comes down to culture, right? If you're in a culture where they're just not receptive to what you're saying, then it really doesn't matter how many times you say it or like the way that you say it.
Yeah, you raise a good point over there. And I remember that you used to be a legal professional, or you studied law. How's that transition into tech? Like, are you still using what you learned back in law school, or like, yeah, how's that going?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think something that I picked up from working in law is understanding how to structure an argument and understanding things like using language, because law is all about using language. And this is something I still really enjoy, right? So I think, yeah, things like use of language, also things like analytical skills. These are some of the things which I picked up working in law, which I still use on a regular basis. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'm comfortable challenging stakeholders and asking questions like, are you really sure you think that this is a problem? Or like, are you really sure this is it? What are your assumptions? I think I'm okay asking those difficult questions because I come from a background where it's normal to ask those difficult questions.
How's that being perceived as someone who is a female executive, right? Would you be then seen as very aggressive or being very pushy? Yeah, I'm just wondering how do people take that, especially in Singapore? Yeah.
Honestly, it's really been a mixed bag. I've worked with some people who are incredibly supportive, and I've also worked with some really horrible people who, you know, claim to be supportive but really aren't. I still do think, unfortunately, that working as a fairly outspoken female in tech, it doesn't rub everyone the right way, right? Some people just don't like it because it goes against what they think a woman should be doing or what a woman should be like. Yeah, I just don't work with those people.
I get it. I mean, not every culture is as what they claim to be.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if I'm a CEO, if I'm a team manager today, like, and I want to hire for more diversity, I want more of my product teams to have more. How can I structure my culture? How can I structure my work environment to actually attract female talent, right? Like women in tech, yeah, in general.
Wow, this is something I discuss like on a semi-regular basis with my other like lady friends in tech as well. I think one of the if you look at the funnel, right, the hiring is basically a funnel. I think a lot of companies fail at the very top by writing job descriptions that come across as very masculine.
Tell me more. What do you mean by masculine?
Oh, they may seem very much about like hard numbers, very quantitative. I'm not saying that women like necessarily shy away from that, but there was actually someone did some research about this, about how the way that you write your job description, certain words will attract men or women. And if you're not careful, you're just going to attract more men.
Oh, that's fascinating. I wasn't aware of that. Wow.
Yeah. It came out. It's not new. It came out a few years ago, and I remember this because like my friends and I were like, yeah, it's so true. Like sometimes you read a JD and you're like, I'm really not really sure I want to like work here. It doesn't seem like a very like friendly, open, diverse place, right?
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so going back to, like maybe the JDs you've read, or maybe the companies you've joined, what can I do as a leader to welcome someone, a talent like yourself, into the company? Yeah.
I think something I have, well, I mean, I can't give any direct advice right now, but I think that there is actually a tool online where you can run your JD through it and see what kind of biases come up. And that will tell you like where you need to tweak your JD. I think the other thing is if your company is really diverse and a great place to work for diverse people, other people will know very quickly from word of mouth. I strongly believe in word of mouth, and that means that, for example, like say I'm working for a company, I'm super happy. Everyone in my network knows I'm super happy. And then I say, hey, by the way, we're now hiring. Do you want to join? Because I know, like people know that I'm having a good experience, they're going to be much more likely to say like, you know what, you sounds like you're having a great time. Your manager sounds great. Sounds like a really diverse place. They care for everyone. Like, yeah, I think I'll just like apply and join, right? And if you look at a lot of hiring, companies generally prefer to hire from word of mouth first. Before they go to a recruiter. Recruiter is like really, like when you've exhausted your networks, you still can't find anyone, and you're like, okay, we need to look outside the network. But it's always much easier for a company to hire within someone's network because there's that trust, right? You only recommend people that you trust, and you would only want to work for a company which you trust is going to take care of you.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's related to the topic of employer branding as well. And your employees are actually your best brand ambassadors to attract new talent into the company. And I was just wondering about cultures, like product cultures. You've worked in both UX teams and product management teams. You work on both sides. So let's say, what should product managers know more about UXers, and what should UXers know more about product managers so that they can work better together?
Yeah, I really feel like UXers and PMs are, they're on the same side of the river, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And I think it's just because I think it's because, I recognize that PMs are constantly under pressure to, manage stakeholders. PMs are kind of like this sandwich. They're sandwiched, right? They have to like please stakeholders, and they are like above, and they also have to please stakeholders that they work with. I think UXers should help, like work with PMs to help them understand what is the most important thing that they should be building, because PMs should be spending time with customers on a regular basis, but the reality is that they can't, right? But guess who does? It's the UXers. So they, PMs and UXers can definitely work together more closely by, having deliberate time to sit down, like maybe once a month, to say like, hey, listen, UX, sir, can you tell me like what research you've done recently? Like, what have you uncovered? What do I really need to know? And how does that feed into like the wider product roadmap? Like, should we be reprioritizing something based on like what you've learned? I also think that UXers, when they're like, I just spoke about UXers working with PMs. So PMs, when they're working with UXers, I guess like PMs need to allow UXers the time. And I think I have seen like sometimes PMs shelter the UXers and like allow them the time to just, do the work that they need to do. But sometimes there's just like too tight a timeline, and they're like, I need a design. I have this problem right now. I need a design for like, 2 weeks time. And I'm like, okay, let me put something together. but you don't allow the UXer to have the time necessary to bring rigor to their work. So I think that's something that PMs should bear in mind when working with UXers. But above all, I think there needs to be a solid relationship between the two, with mutual respect and open communication. Really, I think with those you can go very far.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that communication is really key here, and there needs to be communication in order to build trust between both parties in this case, and time to do the necessary work itself. I hear this quite a fair bit from people. Like sometimes people get confused. Is like product management part of the UX discipline? Like that's something I do hear, right? Like people get confused. Is product management like a specialization of UX? Do you want to like clarify that?
Yeah, I actually see UX as one leg of PM. I mean, this is something I was talking to the students about this morning, about how like as a PM you have three legs. You have UX, tech, and business, and most people come in from like one of the legs, and then you kind of like build out your strength in the other legs. Yeah, I think UX is an important leg of PM. And sorry, what was your original question?
Yeah, I think people got confused because they're saying, hey, product management is part of UX, but you're saying that UX is needed for good product management, right? UX, tech, and business. You're saying that.
Yeah, but I would definitely say that UXers can benefit from having a product mindset. So something I do see when I talk to UXers is that they're very, very focused on the design and optimizing for the most perfect, like useful design. But that doesn't necessarily, but they don't necessarily take into mind like the business side of it. Like, is this going to be profitable? Is anyone going to pay money for this? Like, what are they actually going to pay money for? So I think this is something that I always like to keep in mind. And I think when I was talking to someone the other day, like I think I was talking to a PM the other day about something I learned on a project, completely different project last year. I think I was working with quite a senior PM, and something he said is like, no matter what problem you're solving, and no matter what role you're in, you always want to have your eye on where the money's going, because that will tell you where the value is.
That makes a lot of sense.
And you don't need to just like build around the money, man.
Follow the money. That's what
Follow the money, yeah.
Follow the money. Yeah, that makes sense. I was wondering, you worked for different companies before, including like a really big company in the US. I was just wondering, in terms of like practices and process, have you seen anything worthy of like other companies to like follow or to copy, right? Like really, really good cultural practices, or really, really good practices in the company that helps attract talent, or better ways for PMs and UX to work together. Like, have you seen any of that in your entire career?
I think something interesting that I've seen, which Intuit implemented and really championed, and I think it generally did help with the what do you call it, how the company was perceived and why people would want to work for the company. So it was Intuit was mentioned in the Lean Startup book, and it's one of the few companies in the world that began to really champion the Lean Startup methodology. And as someone who worked there for a few years, like I did see that it's not just PR and like, oh yeah, we champion like being close to the customer. They actually made sure that people were trained in the Lean Startup methodology, even people in finance and HR, because they realized that this experimental mindset is something which is applicable like in any department. And when you have an experimental mindset, you have a learning mindset. And that means that you're more open to improving things based on what you've learned. so yeah, I definitely think that this helped, recruit people, because people were like, oh, it sounds like you're open to, you're not so rigid, you're actually open to experimenting and like seeing how to improve things, and it's not just the top down, like, whatever the CEO says goes.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And earlier we were talking about the fact that we were experimenting the timings of this particular session. I was just wondering, what's your advice to leaders, right? If I want to bring a more experimental mindset to my team, what are the 2 or 3 things I can do today to kind of help the team to be more experimental? Yeah.
I think a very foundational thing is to make sure that there's psychological safety, because, and this is something which is like really neglected, in my opinion. If there's no psychological safety, people will not experiment. There's this concept of, scarcity and abundance, and you can only really be experimental and open when you feel abundant, and when there's psychological safety. If you make people feel like anything they do which could possibly result in failure, will result in embarrassment or punishment, they're not going to want to experiment. They're not going to speak out. They're not going to say anything. They're just going to do what you tell them to do, and that's it. So I think, being aware of the psychological safety is definitely key. I think also looking at, do you allow space for people to experiment? Because if, and this also relates back to abundance and scarcity. Like if people are constantly, constantly like working on building the next thing for next week, they have no space to experiment because the stakes are so high. So you also need to allow them the space for them to create an experiment and say like, hey, if you want to try this, it's okay. So something that I'm doing with the robotics company I'm working with right now is all the developers are like, I have all these ideas, but I feel like we don't have any time to like explore it or experiment or anything. So, we had a retro, and I said like, well, okay, guys, it sounds like we need to just set time. So why don't we just say, like once a month, we'll have a meeting. Whatever ideas you have, bring it to that meeting. Let's discuss it. You can pitch it. And if we all think like, yeah, it's an awesome idea, then go ahead and we'll put into the next sprint. So it's not something that could necessarily contributes to the roadmap, but we've allowed the space for for the developers to say like, hey, I really believe in this. I think it's a real problem. I think it'll bring real impact. Like, let me build it.
Yeah, I want to say that's actually a really great display of leadership and good listening, just to allow the team to do that. You're so right about psychological safety. I think it's not easy, especially when working for big companies. It can get quite political, and certain cultures, are very intense, right? Like because of the growth, because of whether it's like they're already IPO'd, and that's like, it's very sales driven. So people are very anxious about delivering sales targets. It's quite difficult to actually allow any room for error in this sense. I really love the vibe of what you're saying, like abundance versus scarcity. Like, would you kind of do you mind like sharing how can we bring a more abundant mindset into our work and what we're doing?
Yeah, I think this is actually like a much deeper conversation. But I'll tell you where I came across this abundance and scarcity thing. I actually did a course called, I think it's called Facilitating Powerful Conversations, with a guy called Tong Yi in Singapore. And that was where I learned about abundance and scarcity and, a host of other things. And I think whenever you're trying, as a leader, whenever you're trying to implement any kind of change, or you always first want to start at the level of yourself. You cannot implement change if you're not aware of yourself and how you show up in your system, in your wider system. We're all a system, right? You are a system of one, but then like you and me, Dalen, we're a system of two. together with Curious Core, that's a system of 5. And the complexity obviously increases exponentially that the more members of a system you have. So I think as a leader, like when you're looking at how can I, create psychological safety, how can I be more abundant, whatever, you want to look at yourself first, how you're showing up. Because I think there are a lot of people that I mean leaders, right, who say, oh, I really want the team to experiment more. I really want them to be like open, but they're so tense and scarce. And when you talk to them, you feel like you're constantly pressed for time. Like you don't feel abundant. You don't feel like you're in an open state.
Oh my God. That sounds very stressful, talking to them.
You're like, okay, I'll hurry up and experiment. Yeah. So I think, actually even not just leaders, right? Regardless of who you are, you should be curious about your interpersonal self. How you show up, what triggers you. I mean, yeah.
Just being self-aware in general.
Being really self-aware, right? I think a very good example is if you are not aware that you are, say you had a bad night of sleep, that makes you really cranky. Then you go to your first meeting and you just kind of, like yell at everyone, or you just like throw a tantrum. That means that anyone else in that meeting is probably going to spread that same misery to their other meetings. And it just
That's true. That's true.
Right. And people don't necessarily think about this, like how you show up like for yourself and a system. Please be more conscious, guys.
Yeah, there's a lot of a ripple kind of like effect, like based on the energy we bring and the presence that we bring in as leaders or as team members into a team. If a leader feels nervous, generally the team feels nervous as well, right? So
it cascades. Yeah, it just cascades. That's why they always say culture starts from the top. Right? I mean, this is also like a separate discussion about like power structures.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot to go into, and definitely it's worth a deeper discussion. I think just to kind of like wrap up things, thank you for sharing a little bit more today about how UXs should work better with product managers, and also like the impact of UX and product management mindset in companies. I was just wondering, do you have any like parting advice or parting words that you might want to share to our audience over here about the topic or the discussion today? Yeah.
I think regardless of which industry you're working in or what role you're in, whether your work or your personal life, I think it's always worth taking an experimental mindset, because you'll never know if you'll be surprised by where it leads you. Yeah.
Yeah, and with that, I really love how we ended. The intersection between product design and management seems to be an experimental mindset, an abundant mindset. So really love that. And anyway, you're all welcome to follow Jane Ng on LinkedIn. She's available. Are you still active on LinkedIn, or you're not?
I'm not active on LinkedIn.
Okay, wrong channel then. But all right, I think well, if you need to reach out to Jane, you're welcome to reach out to us, because Jane is one of our instructional team members here. And thank you, Jane, for your time, and thank you for sharing, and thank you to the audience who have been staying and have been learning, and we hope this is useful for you. I'm gonna hand it back to Logesh from my marketing team.
Thank you, Dalen, and thank you, Jane, for your very insightful sharing. It's really very useful. And meanwhile, I'd also like to share with you that if you have any questions at the moment, you can actually drop it out in the chat box below, or you can reach out to us via LinkedIn, and we will send it respectively to Dalen or Jane regarding your questions that you have. Meanwhile, I just want to share with you something about what Curious Core does. So we are a tech school, so we actually provide adult learning educational courses related to tech education, such as UX, CX, design thinking, product management courses. So like Dalen has shared, Jane is actually one of our PM instructors. So we have a 2-day course that's also happening this Saturday on 28 May. So feel free to check it out. And we also do customized masterclasses for team training and group and individual coaching for those who are looking to scale their businesses. So yeah, we have almost come to the end of our session. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/c/curiouscall. So this video should be available by end of today. Yeah, so we have come to the end of the session, and we'd like to thank Jane for her insight and everyone for taking the time to attend our session today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.